Hi, folks. Welcome to the Natty Hub podcast. I'm Davin, and this is Croissant and Protein Man, who you may be familiar with. This is going to be on Croissant channel as a series. We're going to be doing sort of a roundtable type of discussion where we may interview some additional guests, but the three of us will be giving our recurring thoughts on various fitness topics. So today we're going to be talking about overuse injuries, when to change your program and why, and a few other topics as well. It should make for a nice, easy listening. So thanks for stopping by. If you haven't already, go ahead and click subscribe on Croissantrophy's channel. All right, thanks for tuning in. Guys, how are you doing today?
Everything's fine, man.
Yeah,
Good.
I'm doing pretty great. I finished the deload and I'm back on training, and man, it feels good. And also, we are having a nice podcast today talking about my favorite topic, which is training, especially programming. So we're going to have a pretty good time, in my opinion. Overuse injury is a topic that, although it's very discussed, is not really put into practice. It's usually talked in a very abstract way. So it's nice to get three guys that lived and have actual experience talking about this kind of issue, instead of being like an optimal guru that just reads studies and spews them out and tells you what to do based on that. So yeah, I would like to hear your thoughts regarding overuse injuries. We have been chatting a little bit before this, so I would like to get them like a clear thoughts, what you have on your mind, Croissant.
All right. First of all, let's define what it is and what it isn't an overuse injury, or what causes and what prevents it. So, in my opinion and my experience, an overuse injury is not caused by the repetition of an exercise throughout the week. That's what everyone thinks, because you can repeat the same movement multiple times a week and not have any injuries at all. So what is causing an injury in this case is the inadequate use of the all other variables in your training. Too much intensity, too much volume, not enough recovery, etc.
I think that's a solid point. In my opinion, yeah, you have multiple ways of preventing injuries. I myself, in my experience, I have noticed that the more frequently and more intensely you do an exercise, the more you have to rotate through different variations. I like to have what is called soft variations in a program that are basically very specific, very similar variations to a movement, but they are not quite the movement. That way, because my style of training, as you know, is very high frequency, very high volume, very intense. And of course, if I did the same movement every single time, I would start to break down. But that doesn't mean you have to be constantly rotating between movements. If you're a person that benefits from low volume, right, you're what Geoff calls a racehorse, it might be better for you to stick to one movement, because you're going to get that neurological adaptation benefit, and it's going to allow you to get better and better at the movement, allowing you to push the weight more and more. So that's a way of progressive overload, and I think it should take priority for you. Gavin, I would like to know what you think about that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely interesting where, people can get hyper focused on like one key thing, like maybe exercise selection. They might think, oh, okay, bench press or squat or deadlift, right? Like that's just gonna result in overuse injuries where or as Yuri said, it's just the repetitions of doing the same movement, right? Like there's different ideas about what causes overuse. I think we all know what it is, right? Our body is inadequately recovering. We don't feel good. We're on the course to being in more pain and more pain if we don't do something based on how our training's going. But it's like you guys have already been sort of hinting at, it's the culmination of multiple things. So whether that's just poor choices of load. So if you're squatting 10, 15 pounds heavier than you can realistically be controlling with solid, crisp form more often than you really could get away with, that's going to result in overuse, right? Or maybe always doing push-ups on the floor in the same position for your wrists, and you haven't really stretched your wrist and trained them to adapt to that position, then maybe that can cause overuse, right? So it's not necessarily the same movement or a particular type of load or particular percentage. It's how the big picture of your training culminates from all the pieces together. But that being said, you can think back to moments maybe in your training past, I can, where I had more movement variety and my joints felt better. So maybe there's something to be said about movement variety. But at the same time, when I think about loading, maybe I wasn't using that heavy of a load or going that close to failure or training that often. So there's other things that need to be taken into consideration. So I think the biggest value to people who are looking to avoid overuse is don't read too far into just one aspect of your program. Try and consider all of it. Really be critical of your own technique. Are you warming up properly? Are you prepared for the ranges of motion that you're using? Like you see people like Bald Omni-Man popularize things like the deadlift with the super stiff legs and the reach, or a deficit deadlift. If you're not really ready for that, you don't have a lot of hamstring flexibility, a normal deadlift or Romanian deadlift is probably going to work just fine. Same thing with ATG squats. You've got terrible mobility and great big long legs. Maybe it's not the best for you to be going that deep, that heavy, that often. So just try and be very critical about what's going wrong with your own training, even if it's things you don't want to hear, right?
Yeah, you brought up two interesting points that I think are very, very good. The first one is about warm-ups. Sometimes, and most of the times actually, people think that, for example, they will say something like, I can't bench more than twice a week with the same variation, right? Or I can't go low reps on the bench, right? Because I get shoulder issues. And most of the time, you'll see that it's not really overuse injuries because, let's be honest, and this is something I have noticed, the reason to why, for example, Alpha Destiny has a lot of variations and rotates every single week, and then he comes back to the same variation, but he has changed and all of that gist. The reason to why he does it is because he's fucking strong. Like he's ridiculously strong compared to us. So it makes sense that the absolute load and all the stress that it puts on his body is going to force him to rotate more frequently. But if you're just a regular guy that benches no more than 2.5 plates, maybe, right? It's not going to affect you really. I think you can totally bench twice a week with the same variation. The only thing is that most people that fall into this category of oh, I can't bench twice a week is because they're not warming up properly. That's the first aspect that you pointed out. And the second thing is that, and this is really good that you pointed it out, they choose variations that do not match with their bodies. Like, for example, in my case, I do a lot of ring extensions, right? I do ring extensions on my arm day and on my first upper day, right? But the problem with that movement is that if I were to do it 3 times a week, my tendons will start hurting. Is it because I can't do overhead extensions more than twice a week? No, it's because that specific movement fucks up my elbows. So if I'm going to do it, I'm going to warm up first, really get that synovial fluid in, and then I'm going to do the extensions, and I'm going to limit it to twice a week. Then you can play with the exercise selection and choose another movement that is not going to affect you in that specific manner. So if you wanted to, for example, do the same movement throughout the week, right? For example, triceps, you wouldn't do something that fucks up your elbows. You would do something like cable extensions, cable push down. That's going to allow you to up the frequency, up the volume, and up the intensity, because it's a movement that is safe on the joints, at least for you, right? For some people, they may be able to get away with extensions. Croissant, I think you have experienced something like this in the past with biceps, right?
Yeah, that was years ago. And at that time, I was not very smart with my training, especially with curls. I did a lot of cheat curls, heavy weights, and I was spamming those. So, but it got better. But still, for the past 4 or 5 years, I've been doing pretty much the same week after week after week, and never got injured. I've been doing squats 2 to 3 times a week for 4 years. And by squats, I don't mean high bar squat. I mean the squat movement pattern. I do front squat, Bulgarian squat, split squats, but it's a squat. I mean, I'm not preventing overuse injury by changing the exercise, because I'm doing the same. It's the same movement pattern. It doesn't mean I do bench one day and dumbbell bench the other. You are not avoiding overuse injury because you changed the exercise. What usually happens is that you change the intensity of the exercise. If I did high bar squat 3 times a week, I will surely get injured. No doubt about that. because I do lower reps for that particular exercise. A different variation that allows me to change the intensity, change the volume, do higher reps, accumulate less fatigue while still training the same muscle in the same movement pattern. And that's how we avoid an injury. It's not because I'm not doing squats. It's because I'm changing a lot of other stuff with the variation.
Now,
Yeah, I mean, you
Croissant,
have a lot of
I'd like to ask you a question on that, Croissant. You brought up something really good too, where you mentioned the cheat curls, right? Heavy. Do you think part of what's allowed you to train certain movements, repetitively week after week, as time goes on, as you've gotten better at training, and as you would say in your own words, right, like the programming smart. Do you think part of that's just rep quality, like nicer reps are conducive to
Sure.
the same exercise more? Yeah.
Absolutely. Like almost everyone, when we start training, you focus mostly on numbers. You don't care at what cost. You want to add weight, add weight, add weight. But at what point you have to think how you're training, not only how much you are into the bar, but okay, is this working what I want to work?
Yeah.
Can I control this weight, or am I just working my ego?
Are you butchering it? Yeah.
But
That's
yeah,
actually something pretty funny. I never had like I know you two guys are very keen on strength. I know you like to push the numbers, do the compounds. I actually was the opposite when I started. When I first started, I actually trained similar to how I train now, but without the intensity. So it was basically shit training, and I also avoided the compounds a lot. And instead of, I had the opposite fear of you. Instead of like being like, I need to add weight constantly, I was thinking I need to add sets, I need to add reps, and I never wanted to move. This is something like pretty crazy. I actually got sad one day because I was doing the cable crossovers, the cable movement. And I realized that 20 kilograms was already too light for me because I was able to do like 40 repetitions with that. I was like, oh man, fuck! I need to, I need to put the pin one level down, to lift more weight. And now I'm looking back at it, and I was like, I was such an idiot because I was thinking about like instead, like, can you comprehend like a lot of people have that ego lifting? I had the opposite type of ego lifting. It was more of I need to not move the weights. I need to get that mind muscle connection.
Oh yeah.
I was that kind of guy. But the good thing is that I think it helped a lot of my tendons because the muscles that I work with that style of training, being my chest, my back, my shoulders, they are resilient as fuck. Like they have never been injured, like never. The only injury that I have had is the elbow tendonitis and wrist, but it was because of constantly stretching it like this. But outside of that, I have never been injured, so it's pretty crazy. That high rep training is very underrated for tendon health. Devin, what you think about like, for you at least, if you were to like build a strength program for someone, this is a question I have been thinking. If you were to build a strength program for someone, would you make them rotate through different exercises? Would you make them do soft variations, as I call them, or would you make them do the exact same movement, like a power building program, not necessarily a strength program? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think one of the most, like, I can actually think back to a client that I trained last year. Yeah, I trained for most of 2022, and for her program, it was actually she basically came in just wanting to get strong. She didn't know anything about like, lifting, power building, bodybuilding. She just wanted to get strong. I did something that I think would be a very good idea for other people's programs, where rather than say this type of split, that type of split, I made up her own split where there was a day 1, 2, and 3. And so it was like, I don't remember exactly which day was which, but there was a bench focus day, squat focus day, deadlift day, and then all the other, let's say, assistant exercises. So if there's RDLs to back off, or dumbbell bench to back off, biceps curls, laterals, all the other ones, isolations, all your fillers. But they were done well. They were done intensely. They were tracked. They were pushed with progressive overload. But basically, it would be like a day 1, 2, 3, day 1, 2, or gap, and then day 1, 2, and then next week, because you only did day 3 once, now you're going to rotate. So it was like a 3-week rotation where every week there's a type of day that you're only doing once. And what did that mean? That means that you're constantly rotating recovery. So rather than rotate variation, you're rotating an extra day of recovery. And that 3-week rotation pretty much allowed for like like zero need for like a deload. And I think the only issues that she ran into would have been attempting a weight that's a bit too heavy. So where like Croissant mentions like the importance of intensity. If it was, 5 pounds or 10 pounds too much for the deadlift to be reasonable as far as like rep quality, eccentric control, all that sort of thing. Yeah, then that's what it came down to. So it was like a combination of really trying to become a stickler for appropriate loading, like good technique, and then rotating recovery. And that's what it was. Was there, secondary variations? Yes, but actually they were often trained on the same day as the main. So it wasn't even like you would like have a Romanian deadlift day. They were done on the same day as the deadlifts themselves.
Right. That's actually a really smart way of programming. And I would like to know your thoughts, both Croissant and you, about having like longer weeks or training cycles, I call them. Instead of having like a 7-day split, you actually have like an 8-day split, a 9-day split, a 10-day split, because like a while back, it was very trendy. And I also jumped on the bandwagon. It was about making like 8-day splits, for example, with Bald Omni-Man. I think Croissant himself also had like an 8-day split. It was very trendy back then. And I went back to my high frequency training, but but there was a couple of guys that stayed with that longer training week. And from what I've noticed, right, is that they usually can tolerate much more volume, much more intensity, because you have more time to recover. So I would like to know your thoughts on that, regarding like expanding your training week so you can prevent overuse.
Yeah, Croissant, do you want to go
That's
first?
very,
Yeah.
yeah, sure. That's very personal, in my opinion. I mean, it can work if it works for you. Now, if I can, I train every single day. I take a rest day when I have a very busy day and I can't train. Then I take the rest, and I'm fine. I never got injured. I train with very basic stuff: barbell, dumbbell, free weight, week after week, and I have rotation, of course. I mean, it's not that there's no value in using variation in exercises, but the benefit of doing that is not so much for preventing injury, that of course it helps, but it's just to promote progression.
Right.
Because if I bench 3 times a week, I'm going to plateau real quick, and I don't want that. So I bench one day, do push-ups the other, I do dumbbell bench the other. It's still the same. I'm still pressing in this movement pattern, but it's variation. It's a new opportunity to progress, and each exercise feed off of each other. So
Yeah,
it's just an opportunity to keep progressing, but that's the goal. That's why I use rotation. It's not to prevent injuries.
Yeah. Have no weaknesses. Yeah, for as little as possible.
Sure.
Yeah, good.
But
I love your collection of barbells in the background there. Yeah. And
yeah.
awesome.
And that's the only thing I do. I mean, I do straight barbell bench, Swiss bar bench, dumbbell bench, push-ups. I mean, week after week after week, I'm doing only this movement for chest.
Right.
My shoulders are fine, my joints are fine. I mean,
Yeah,
And you're training the very
absolutely.
suboptimal behind the neck press, right?
yeah,
So,
sure.
yeah.
With the easy bar, dude. Remember the Croissant dungeon days where he would like record a video in the middle of the dark, with a faint light, and he's like behind, like with facing away from the camera with the easy bar, like pressing like this,
I remember.
very very menacing vibes, But yeah, dude, like you mentioned something. I want to hear Davin's opinion on this, and then I'll add. But you mentioned about like the synergy between the presses. We need to talk about that, Davin. I would like to hear your 2 cents on that as well, before you give your response.
Sure. Yeah. With pressing motions, it's similar to the relationship between squat and hip hinge movements and pulling movements, right? Like vertical versus horizontal. It's not just that you can distinctly separate them of, okay, this one goes up and this one goes out. There's actually like a spectrum along the way. So if you're doing different angles, that there's a room for a variety of benefits, and you can just sort of think about, okay, it's like a continuum of, you know, as you change that angle gradient, you're going to change the muscle activation gradient as well. Doesn't mean that 15-degree incline bench is superior or inferior to 30-degree. It's just that they're a little bit different in their consequence. If you like the way one of those feels better, maybe you should think about it. If you never have somewhere that's in between vertical and horizontal, that might impact your ability to like develop your incline bench. And I mean, I have some thoughts on like guillotine style incline bench. I'm actually thinking about including that in my program. So I think that's underrated, like bringing the bar into your throat. That's the way Arnold Schwarzenegger used to do it. So I'm thinking I should start training like that to get a bigger upper chest. But yeah, you if you're hammering the same movement pattern, it's okay. Especially like we just mentioned, discussed before, the rep quality, right? Good quality push-ups, good quality camber bar, bench, or nemesis bar, flat bar. You know, some things sure it might not feel that great for your wrists at first, but some of the aches and pains that are going to happen with pressing or squatting or deadlifting actually just iron out over time. Like I'll have beginners be like, oh, the flat barbell bench doesn't feel that good. And I'll be like, okay, instead of doing this, try this. Get it lighter for your wrists, you know? Like just adjust it and then also just get used to it. Like same thing with back squatting. It does not feel comfortable to have 200 pounds on your back when you're early in your program, but that sensation in your traps just goes away. Like by the time you can squat 300 pounds for reps, it no longer really feels like that anymore. And then if you were to stop training it for 6 months and go back, you'd probably find that your traps are sensitive again. So some of it is just, you just got to tough it up, suck it up. But then a lot of it's going to come down to rep quality as far as, you know, the smoothness of those reps. Yeah.
And regarding the 8-day kind of thing, you know, the extra expand week expansion.
Yeah. The 8-day thing. Yeah, that's right. I think it's good. But just like anything, you do it consistently. So, you know, I know Ball Man was big on saying, you know, you don't have to contain it to a week. Well, at the same time, you have to be consistent. Obviously, he wouldn't say, you know, do it however you want, but as long as it's tracked diligently, yeah, that 8-day tumble, right? It's not going to fall in perfect weeks. It's going to be sort of like a tumble, just similar to that program I described, the day 1, 2, 3, and then the rotate. As long as you're keeping track of everything and you're being consistent, it doesn't really matter if Monday was bench day and then now it's squat day, or it was pull-up day, now it's ring push-up day. As long as it's done consistent, you track things, Excel sheet, phone notes, logbook, whatever you've got, yeah, that's going to work just fine. Now, that being said, you can condense work. So if someone wanted to do like a day 1, day 2, repeat it, yeah, you could do day 1 and 2 Monday, day 1 and 2 again Thursday, Friday, have a generous Wednesday rest, maybe do some cardio or things like that, stretching, and then take the weekend off and then just go back and pound your body. Those might necessitate being longer workouts with larger numbers of sets or larger numbers of exercises, but there's nothing in the same way you can spread out work, you can condense it. But in that condensed version, you have lots of rest days. So it's up to you how you want to approach it. You have a lot of freedom.
Yeah, that's actually like, you know, I'm a big frequency fanatic, you know, enjoyer, big frequency enjoyer. But I have to say that for sure, you can, if you have the work capacity, this is actually pretty funny. We were talking about this with Croissant like a couple of hours ago. Basically, we train very similar. If you check our programs, then I'm going to ask you something, Croissant. But if you check our programs, you'll see that we like high volume. We tend to like pushing the intensity on some movements. On other, not so much, at least himself, because he does more strength kind of thing. He has some like sprinkled in some kind of strength work. I don't. But in general, the hypertrophy part of the program is very similar: high volume, high intensity, high frequency. And what I have found, at least, is that like rotating movements is a good way of doing it. But also, you can, like with calisthenics, for example, like we have a lot of an overlap with that. With calisthenics, we can push the volume higher as well, like and the intensity as well. We can push very, very hard. And also we can have, like, the stark difference we have is that he has longer workouts and I don't. I have like very short, very sporadic workouts with super high volume, super high intensity, but they are short. Yuri's programs, they're long as fuck. Like they have a lot of compounds, a lot of pulls and stuff. And I look at it and I'm like, I just can't handle it, but Yuri can. So maybe, at least for me, some people can manage with low frequency. And this is something that I have changed my mind on ever since we started talking about it. and is that some individuals can actually take that amount of workload in a single workout without getting almost to non-junk volume. When you watch, I think you watched the natural hypertrophy Herzoviak video. The guy does insane amounts of volume on every single session. You have seen it. Like he does 10 by 10 on like he does full body 3 times a week. And on one session, for example, he does like 20 sets of presses in a single session, like incline and vertical. And then he does like an insane amount of pulls. And then on top of that, he adds legs to that. So it's a pretty crazy amount of workload for every single session, but he can take it. I can't, for example, I can't. I need short workouts, but maybe, for example, someone like Croissant or someone that has like a sports background and is very endurant can probably take a bro split, for example. Even though I don't like them, you can make a bro split work if your work capacity and your capabilities of enduring workload are high enough. I would like to know your thoughts on that, Croissant.
Yeah, my workouts, I mean, they usually last for 2 hours, but they're not that long on paper. It's usually 7 exercises per day. That is not that crazy. But for example, on upper days, I'm doing 16 sets of presses in one day.
Right.
And 16, at least 16 of pulls on upper days, twice or 3 times a week. So it is a decent amount of volume for most people.
It's a pretty much a lot of volume. It's a lot, man.
Like Protiman was saying that in what we were just talking about earlier, on my compound movements, I don't fail. I mean, I go to failure, 1 of 0 reps in reserve, but I don't fail the movement on bench press or OHP. But on calisthenics, when I do my push-ups, rings, whatever, I do go beyond failure.
Nice.
And that's the difference between why his workouts are shorter. It's because he can push intensity on every single movement, each set. I only push intensity on my calisthenics movements. The rest is also high intensity, but not as much because I'm not failing the movement. So that's the big difference. Also, why I can do more work. If I did all calisthenics, I will probably need less volume because every single set will be beyond failure. But since I'm not doing that with bench press, I'm not doing. I fail. I rest the bar, rest my chest, and keep pushing.
Maybe your dog can like spot shoot, so you can go to failure. You know, you have Olivia there helping you with each rep. You know.
Come on, man, just do quarter reps off the chest. It's not that hard, you know.
That's like a jail type of thing to do, you know. Like
like, I'm stuck. I might as well do some work down here.
like, yo, dude, that's actual suicide training. I like it. By the way, I want to mention something you mentioned. Like you talked about the guillotine press to work. We need to get you some rings. You need to try the Bulgarian push-ups or guillotine push-ups. They call them like that. It's the exact same movement, but because they are rings, right, and they are push-ups, they're safer on the shoulder, and at the same time, you get the mobility to like properly stretch it how you like it, you know. So you can target the upper, the middle, the lower chest. It's unbelievable. You should definitely get some rings. We need to get Davin on rings by the end of this series, dude, for real. And I'll front squat. I swear, if you get rings, I'll front squat 500 pounds.
That's worth it just to see you front squat.
Like, this is actually pretty funny. The little leg training I did when I first started, I actually turned it all into upper back training with a little bit of legs. So it's pretty ironic, you know. It's the calisthenics guy in me, you know. He's still alive, you know. But yeah, going back to the topic that Croissant mentioned about like being able to push volume with calisthenics and intensity. They are also less taxing on the joints. I have found, at least with for example, with push-ups, I can literally like do a push-up and then externally rotate and keep going down until I'm like this, like a pelican curl, something like that, and really stretch the whole chest. But for example, try doing that on dumbbell bench. Imagine a guy going like this, and then he twists like that. Like you would see his rotator cuff on the floor. You know, you'd be like, "Oh, there it is."
I mean, there are those things. What do they call them? It's a press fly, right? You come down and out,
Ah, the barrel press. The
Barrel press,
barrel
right.
press.
right?
Yeah.
There's actually a really good movement. I would highly endorse it, even though I like my chest training to be rings. If you train with weights, the barrel press is unbelievably good. So yeah, definitely give it a shot.
And it's like a lot.
Now,
Do it with control, right? You know, don't jump
yeah,
in.
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Also, I think we're relating it to that. A lot of guys actually get their shit snapped up, not because of the exercise variation, the amount of work they do, the warm-ups, nothing of that. Some guys actually get injured because they forget to do the opposite movement pattern of that movement they're doing. So, for example, you'll get a lot of guys that get injured on the bench press, and it could be to the fact not only of bad technique, but also because they're neglecting the rows, the rear delt work, all the musculature of the scapula to have that stability. So they get injured on bench press, and they're like, "Oh, I can bench more than twice a week," but it's actually just that they are not rowing enough, you know. Or for example, I would usually get like shoulder pain if I didn't do a lot of vertical pressing, because if you do horizontal pressing only, you're going to start to see that you can't really do that much volume if you're not vertical pressing. Like vertical pressing actually helps me do more volume for horizontal. I don't know why that is, but I think it reinforces the scapular area, so that gives you more capabilities of pushing it. Also, if you're doing a lot of lower back work, like lower back extensions, or you're doing deadlifts, RDLs, stuff like that, maybe you should start incorporating some aspect of like spinal flexion. You know, like start hanging off a bar, right, and start doing leg raises and stuff like that as a way of like rejuvenating that area. I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
In addition to opposite movement patterns, it's like complementary too, right? Like I found I had an experience where I was doing lots of bench pressing with very little vertical pressing, and that was just not great on the shoulders. As simple as doing, I think it was at the time, just 3 sets, 1 day a week. I don't train like that anymore, but even at the time, it was number one. It was enough to make very, very steady, consistent, solid gains for the overhead press, the seated shoulder over press, and my shoulders felt better. It was like pain from bench pressing disappeared, and I got extra gains. So, the whole like I had this conversation with Sam Sheethar recently, where it's like you have specificity on one side of a spectrum, and then you have carryover, where everyone's just like it's like, I'm going to build a deadlift by not deadlifting and doing all these things. And then you have people being like, I'm going to get good at bench pressing by doing nothing but bench press. And you want to be somewhere in there, like along that spectrum, but you don't want to go to the extremes, So
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Croissant, what you have to say?
We are all bodybuilders, the three of us. So it makes sense that every time you train a muscle, you're training also the opposite muscle. We are not doing it for any other reason than to develop the whole body. So of course it makes sense, and maybe just because we're bodybuilders, we are preventing all these injuries.
Yeah, that's an issue with minimalism for sure. Like, not only is it that you're not having enough variation for all the work you're doing, or you're doing too much work for a specific muscle, but also considering the fact that you're neglecting some other areas, because people like, although it's a good advice to follow when you're structuring a bodybuilding program, to think about specific muscle groups, like I want to work my chest, I want to work my arms, or I want to work my triceps, for example. We tend to neglect the fact, or we tend to avoid the big picture, that the body is a complete thing. It's not just a chest. It's not just a bicep. It's a complete thing, and the chest also, like your capabilities of pushing chest volume, is also going to depend on your stability of the scapula. Or for example, if you're squatting a lot, you may also need to reinforce the muscles, for example, the tibialis anterior, for example, the hamstrings, stuff like that, because the joints are not just, for example, you have the elbow joint right here. It's not just the bicep. It's not just the tricep. It's also the muscles of the forearm, this whole part here. Usually people get a lot of tennis elbow right here because they neglect the extensors or because they neglect the flexors, the wrist at the same time. You have to think about those areas, right? That where a variety of muscles attached, and you have to realize that, hey, I need to work the other muscles as well, because if you basically neglect the other muscles, this one is going to take over and it's going to eventually lead to injury because you're not going to get the stability that the muscle needs, right?
Do you guys want to add some final thoughts to this topic and then go to the next one?
Yeah, we can move on to
yeah,
the
Davin,
next one, too.
I'll let you have the honors.
Oh yeah, no, I'm good to move on to the like program changing and stuff. That's actually a topic I'm pretty passionate about, so I like that.
Nice.
Well, I'm going to give it then the closing thoughts. I hope you guys don't
Yeah.
mind. Basically, overuse injuries don't happen because of one specific thing. It's not just a single cause. You have a variety of factors you can play with, and focusing just on one to prevent overuse, I think it's dumb. You should try multiple strategies and multiple exercises that you can try for you to find a way to remain specific enough for you to make progressive overload happen, and then to have enough rotation and enough variety for you to avoid doing the exact same thing over and over, because that's when overuse injuries happen. When you do 5x5 bench 3 times a week with the same tempo, with the same implement, that's when overuse injuries occur, when you have the exact same thing over and over and over. But if you change a little bit, maybe a 5x5, and then you do a 3 by 6 to 10, and then I don't know, 4 by 10 to 15, for example. That way you can start like daily undulating periodization. You can start basically finding ways of doing a little bit, doing things a little bit different to avoid those injuries.
Yeah, that's everything I wanted to say. So that's fine.
Gotcha. Well, let's move on to the next topic. Let's say we have a guy that made his program, started running it, right, starting doing things right, and he finds a little annoyances with the program, not big enough to merit like huge urgent changes, just a little annoyances. Maybe on one day he has to do calves at the end of the session and he doesn't like it. Maybe he has to do like bicep curls at the end of an upper day and he doesn't like it. Would you say to this guy that he should stay with the program or not? Should he change something? When is it okay to change the program? I would like to give your thoughts on that, starting with this hypothetical situation.
Right. For me, that's 4 reasons why you should maybe change the program or why you want to change it. The first reason is because something is out of your control. That a change in your schedule of work, of studies, or whatever, something that forces you to change your split completely. That's one reason to change your workout. Another good reason is because you want to specialize on a specific muscle or specific movement or whatever. Then you have to adapt your training to your needs or your wants. Another reason to change the program is if you're not progressing with that program, but that's a little bit more complicated because there's a lot of other factors. Maybe the program is right, but you're not doing enough effort or volume or whatever. So you want to change that first. And the last reason is if you're new to lifting, you want to experiment, try different things, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's actually a fair conclusion. Davin, what you have to say?
Yeah, like there are things that are going to be imposed on you that are constraints in life, and if you don't work within those constraints, you're not gonna get results. But then at the same time, like Natural Hypertrophy pointed this out with Alan Thrall's like program he's gonna be working with them, right? Or he's making a program, which is super cool. He's like Alan Thrall will be the perfect example of like a coper, right? Like he's 30 now, he has a kid, he runs a business, blah blah blah. I can't make this work, and it's like, no, we're gonna make it work. So yes, everyone's gonna have constraints. Too bad, suck it up, find a way to make it work. And if those constraints change just as Croissant said, yeah, adapt it. You need to adapt it to move on, and all those other reasons were good reasons as well.
Should your programs be like constantly adapting, or should be through phases? Because, for example, in my case, my programs are usually remain almost the same, but what happens is I find different, like my programming gets better for that's like specialization, right? You start to develop like specific adaptations that allow you to push the movement better, and your technique gets better. Well, in this case, I start with a program, right? And as time goes on, I start to find ways to make the program more synergistic, of making it more fun, of adapting it more to me, to my specific needs, right? So what happens is that I make small changes. For example, let's say in this specific case, right? In my program, I usually do horizontal pressing and back, then I do my legs and back, then I have my vertical pressing and arm day, and then I start over. When I first started the program, amazing, and I highly recommend it. But now I'm making a small change, and that is taking the vertical pressing from the arm day and putting it on the upper days. And that's a small change. Over time, I make a lot of those small changes, and my program ends up looking very different to the starting version. So for me, at least it makes sense to be constantly adapting your program. But I also know, and I think I'm going to want to hear your opinion a lot, because you're going to probably disagree. A lot of guys that train for strength, or a lot of guys that I have seen that have some kind of work, will prefer to stick the program, even though they might find a lot of issues with it. And then once they're done with a cycle, or once they are like, okay, I need to really change the program, that's when they change it. But they usually stick with programs, even though they find issues with it. You get what I mean?
Yeah, but it's not the same to adapt your program over time. This will happen pretty much the rest of your life, to change the program. One thing is, okay, I'm doing upper lower for 3 weeks, 3 months, sorry. The next 3 months, I'm doing full body. The next 3 months, PPL. The next 3 months, that's changing your program. That's what you should not do as a more intermediate lifter. But adapting your program, that's totally reasonable. It's something that it will happen. It will happen always.
The split thing is like one that grinds my gears. Like, I'd go a step further for not just intermediates. I don't think anyone should do, a split for three months or something, and then just like swap it. I think that, like, I'm not convinced that a person could take the same exercise selection, same volume prescription, same proximity to fit, basically like the same program, just organize it different, call it upper lower versus full body, and be like, is that different? This is just the same thing rearranged, right? Like, it's like if you took all of someone's living room furniture and then just like moved it to a different position, like, yeah, this isn't a new living room. You didn't you just redecorated with the same stuff you have. So, so there's a difference between that and actually swapping.
Yeah, that's actually yeah. For me, it's that's a good thing that Croissant pointed out, and you as well. Like, adapting the program, I think it's fairly good, but there seems to be, like, when you first start, of course, you want to experiment a lot, but also you don't want to get too sidetracked and start like going from split to split to I don't know, from this amount of volume to that amount of volume, to this exercise from that exercise. I think that changing your program should be something reserved only for radical things, like, for example, you get injured, or again, you want to specialize, you want to maybe, I don't know, you may want to start pursuing strength instead of just bodybuilding, or vice versa, stuff like that. But you shouldn't be like, I have seen a lot of guys that change. For example, in my gym, I have seen guys doing row splits, then they switch to push pull legs, then on the next mesocycle they switch to upper lower, then they switch to I don't know, I have seen guys doing some kind of weird split, the chest and biceps, back and tricep kind of thing, like an advanced row split, I call it. And I think that that's wrong, because the split, it shouldn't be something that changes. It should be something that you have pretty much fixed. It's your way of organizing things. And unless you are basically forced to change it, you shouldn't really change it, because that's going to start to make like, at least for me, it starts to make the schedule a pain in the ass. I changed from upper lower to full body, or I added like extra day, or I made an expand week of training. It would be a pain in the ass to organize it with my schedule. I make my split for my schedule and I keep it that way.
Let's say you are forced to change your program. How would you do it? For example, if you were training 6 days a week, but now you can only train 3, for example, how would you do it?
Well, that's when you're forced to change the program. It depends a lot on if you're going to be forced to have more frequent workouts with shorter time, or the opposite. I tend to favor more frequent workouts with a shorter time. That usually works for most people's schedules, because everyone can train for an hour at least, unless you're very, very busy. In that case, yeah, you may want to see if you can allocate more time to one day another. But in general, most people can handle 6 times a week. But if I was forced to shrink, let's just say, my frequency, what I would do is start prioritizing, because I know that I can't handle long workouts. So what I would do is start taking what I don't care about, which is going to be the leg training. Sorry to say it, but it's true. So I'll probably have like an upper day, like a upper focus day. Then I would have like a leg and arms focus day, like full body. Everything would be like full body 3 times a week, and have like an upper day, a legs and arms focus day, and then I would have a final day where I would do like more vertical pressing, stuff like that, and have back movements on every single one of them. That would be a pretty good template. Now, if it were the opposite, that I was doing full body 3 times a week, and now I have the chance to do 6 times a week, it is actually really easy. You just start to see different. It's actually no. Now that I think about it, it's probably a little bit difficult, in terms of you have to start finding variations that are going to allow you to prevent overuse, or switching the variables to prevent overuse. You're going to start to manage things that way. But the good thing is that you're going to be able to do a lot more work, because more frequent training usually gives you more space to do stuff. And you're also going to have higher quality sets, because you're going to be fresher every single session. Davin, what you think? If you had to change your split, how would you do it?
Well, yeah, well, specifically the 6 to 3 day. I mean, you're kind of faced with a choice. Are you willing to double up the amount of work in the days that you have off? Because if that same person has a lot of responsibilities and they're pressed for time and energy, it might not be the best investment to just cram all of the 6 days into 3. But what you could do is introduce some kind of rotation. Maybe if you had like a week that always repeated, give or take, in your 6 days, and maybe you had some kind of alternating days, upper 1, upper 2 within the same week. Maybe you could start thinking about having a week 1, week 2, and it might be worth spreading out some of that work, whether that's measured in the number of sets you do for a total movement pattern, exercise. Do some exercises week 1, some week 2. Doing that within the constraints of 3 days might stop you from doing. Okay, sure. In Croissant's case, a 2-hour workout might be 7 exercises, and it's nicely paced, good rest, and so on. In your case, it might be 2.5 hour workouts of like 10 to 12 exercises that are brutal. So rather than do that to yourself and have 3 brutal days, you can just have week 1, week 2. And will that slow down your gains? Maybe a little bit, but probably less than a lot of people would think. So I might consider that. Yeah, alternating weeks.
That's actually really smart, dude. Like, you took me by surprise for that one. That's actually having like the upper, like basically the upper 1, lower 1, arms 1, and then having the upper 2, arms 2, lower 2. That's actually really smart, dude. I like, duh.
Freedom, right?
Croissant,
Yeah.
Croissant, what you have to say about this kind of thing? What would you do?
If it was me, I will try to equate every variable to stay as close as possible as my previous split. In my case, maybe a little bit difficult, because I'm doing a lot of work in one day, but still remain as close as possible in terms of volume. For example, if I'm doing 30 sets a week, for example, we'll try to do 10 sets per day. But if that's not possible, because it's too much time, too much work to do in one day, I will try to change other variables, like more intensity, maybe if I can do as much volume. and
That's when
try
you could
to-
include calisthenics, right?
Sure. But yeah, we'll try to equate as much as possible and not lose tonnage, because that's a
Well,
very
I
important
think too,
aspect.
if the 6 day was a good program, even just like condensing it to 3 days doesn't necessarily predict that it's like a bad program now, right? So it just means the strategies you use to manage that work, it might be a little different. Those days might be a bit more tiring, but I don't think it's the difference between success and failure. So yeah, to try and maintain as much as you can, you might as well try before you move on to the next, larger solution.
Yeah.
Sure.
Also, something I want to talk basically ask you is, have you noticed that like some people can actually like take a lot of workload in a single session, right? I, for example, can't. Um, I have noticed that people that can usually take a lot of workload were the ones that have done a lot of sports in the past. Meanwhile, the ones that like have like very short work capacity usually had to like the ones that have a higher workload usually did a lot of endurance sports. Meanwhile, the other ones that have like a smaller workload usually did like very type of like explosive stuff, like actual like basketball, for example, or soccer, stuff like that, where you have to sprint, you know. Um, and then the other guys that have like long workouts usually have done like swimming and marathon running, stuff like that. Have you noticed that? It's something an observation I made.
Yeah, definitely.
Because
Well,
I have
Sam,
like, for example,
Sam mentioned it on my podcast interview with him. He had a history of like boxing, and so he's doing lots of calisthenics. Actually, it's funny. Like he does lots of lifting with barbells now, as you can see, great big barbell lifts. But he started with boxing and calisthenics. 5'10", fairly slender, 145 in high school, going into high school. And he's doing all kinds of, hundreds of push-ups. So to him, it's like when he transferred that to bench press, like he in his mind, he was well set up to bench press 3 times per week. He's also got a shorter arm type of build. In my personal opinion, that combination is probably like what sets him up. But then also rep quality and intensity. So if Sam takes his sets a bit further from failure from someone who's just grinding every single last rep, I think that's also a predictor of higher like volumes and frequencies.
yeah. But yeah, no, it's pretty crazy. For example, Croissant, the guy basically has like a lot of pressing. I myself have a lot of back work, and you usually see people that, for example, I did swimming as well, and the basic like thing you work with swimming, it's the lats, because you're constantly doing this or you're like swimming like that, and lo and behold, my lats are very resilient. The same goes with my triceps. My for example, my shoulders and my legs that I used to also play basketball were the ones that I used more explosively, because when playing basketball you have to shoot, you have to be constantly jumping, sprinting, and stuff like that. And lo and behold, those body parts of mine are the least resilient I have, the least resilient I have. So it's a pretty and also if you take a look at just the average person, what are the muscle groups that can take the most amount of volume and frequency and intensity are usually the calves and the forearms and the traps as well, which are the muscle groups we use the most in our daily lives. They are the most endurant for a reason, right?
If you got to this point, thank you for watching, and tell us what you think. This is like our first episode. These guys have more experience than me. I don't know what I'm doing, but let us know.
We do.
Dude, you did great, like for real. This being your first time. The first time I had a podcast, I was like nervous as fuck. So you did pretty well, man. You gave your points exactly, even better than I did. So yeah, it was a pretty fun thing, man, for real.
Yeah, let's do this again sometime, fellas. It was good.
Yeah,
sure.
The next episode, we're probably either reviewing each other's programs or answering questions from the audience if they like this enough. So yeah, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Leave your thoughts in the comments below.
Your questions.
Leave your questions. Subscribe to Davin. Subscribe to Croissant. If you want, you can subscribe to me. Yeah, thanks for watching.